Happy Wednesday, everybody, and welcome to Lifelong Learning. I'll give you a couple of minutes to take your seats. Thank you. Louder? You need me louder. Oh, I will. I am. I'll yell. You got me. They're still milling in, so we'll give it a couple of seconds. Okay. I'm Donna Faust, the club president. Please take a moment to silence your phones. Our members enjoy many benefits, as you can see, being club members. Our very talented video team records our presentations, which are then posted on our website. So if you're a member, you can access those. If you're not, you'll probably want to go join, and John's back there. He'll take your money happily. The association always wants us to remind you that the views expressed during the presentation, although I'm not too worried about Kenya, are not ours or the club's views, and may not reflect the association or the club leadership. Now, last week I reminded or asked you all to think about volunteering for your favorite club, Lifelong Learning. We do have a few people going off the leadership team, and we'll talk about that at election time. But do remember, we do need help with other things, and you'll get another reminder in the mail. We've already recruited some volunteers, so I'm real happy about that. But I do see a lot of the same faces here, and so why don't you just come and join us and join the fun and help us put these programs together. So let's begin. I'd like to present our very talented program director, Juanita Brown, who will introduce the topic and our speaker. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Lifelong Learning. I'm so glad to see you in the heat that's just starting. Kenya, we don't have Kenya's heat, but we're going to visit Kenya this morning, and I'm looking forward to it. So without further ado, I think most of you already know our Shuetz, our resident world traveler, and so I give you our Shuetz.
Well, thank you very much. It's always great to have an in-person audience, although I will tell you that after Ari does his magic in the video, my photographs will probably look better on your computer in the video than they do on this equipment in this room. So by all means, watch this again in a couple of days as soon as you get the video. So now, before we get rolling, I want to introduce my wife and co-conspirator in these travels, Linda. And just in case I don't get enough appreciation from the audience in general, I brought my own cheering section, my daughter Gretchen and her lifelong friend Karen, who's visiting from California. So with that, we can begin, I think. So many years ago, in an apartment in the Bronx in New York, a little boy who read the encyclopedia and magazines, went to the Bronx Zoo a lot, that would be me, always dreamed of going to Kenya in person to see the animals. And he dreamed that he might be able to get up before dawn, and just as the light started to show in the sky, maybe see a giraffe on the ridgeline, and with a little bit more light, perhaps see a rhino with a big horn. And then see the sunset with a lone bull elephant, knowing that the sunsets are usually pretty dramatic. Kenya being on the equator, the sun goes straight up and down at sunrise and sunset, and there's usually a cloud layer, so it makes for interesting sunrises. Whoops, that's not the button, it's this button. He dreamed that he might be meeting a lion coming out of the tall grass in the early morning light. Or see the flamingos in that early morning light that made the blue so blue and the pink so pink and the green so green. You dreamed of seeing elephants in their natural environment in the rolling hills of central Kenya, a herd with a little baby, instead of just seeing a couple of elephants, behind bars. In those days, zoos weren't very inspired in their habitats, and it was just so different to be able to see the elephants out here enjoying their natural environment. And here the elephants are at the salad bar, having a great old time in the wetlands. And he dreamed of seeing the elephants maybe at a waterhole like this, with the matriarch protecting the young ones until she's satisfied that the tourists mean them no harm. I dreamed of seeing a hippo and even a baby, that's a bonus, out of the water instead of just in that algae-covered green slimy pool that the hippos stay in at the zoo. Dreamed of seeing a cheetah hunting, or a cheetah who has a really tough job ahead of her trying to raise 4 cubs. They're almost never successful, but at raising all 4. But this one was off to a good start, I think. But it was all part of the dream. Dreamt of seeing waterbuck with their characteristic toilet seat imprint on their butt that allows you to identify them quickly. Or seeing a battler eagle. He dreamed of seeing a couple of zebras exchanging a joke, having a good laugh, or nuzzling together, knowing that the zebra do this on purpose. When they stand close together, their stripes form interesting patterns that confuse the lions that can only hunt by singling out an individual zebra. And this, if you look at it long enough, you could believe that it's one really ugly zebra with a big face and a funny looking nose. Or seeing a zebra enjoying a little dust bath. He dreamed that if he got really lucky, he might see an ocelot. There aren't that many wandering around the plains, but he dared to think that he might get that lucky. He thought he might be able to talk to a hyena and find out why are they always laughing, because it's not that funny, really. And he thought maybe he could see a pair of hyenas getting along together, but he knew that they wouldn't get along for very long, because the hyena have a very strict hierarchy in their clan structure, and they spend most of their time arguing with each other when they're not hunting. And he thought maybe if he met a young hyena, he could talk to him about his prospects, given that males don't get to do much in hyena hierarchy. He dreamed that he might see a black rhino. Now, this one is a little dark in color, but generally the blacks and the whites are actually the same color, and the name has nothing to do with the color, really. And if they've got this little red dot here, you can see the lip shape in a black rhino. It's kind of V-shaped, and that's for pulling leaves off branches on bushes, because black rhinos are herbivores. They eat from bushes as opposed to the white rhinos that have wider lips for grazing. Black rhinos aren't very friendly, but the little boy knew that if he got lucky, he might see one. He knew he might see a jackal. They're kind of all over the place. They're scavengers, always looking for something interesting. He thought he might see a monkey. He dreamed that he might have his own private monkey on top of his tent running around early in the morning, making so much noise he thought there was a thunderstorm. He was a little concerned about meeting an ugly old retired bull who was apparently ill-tempered. But then he thought he might meet a bull as well had better looking horns. He looked forward to seeing giraffe, including a couple that are play fighting. The way they fight is they swing their necks and hit each other with those horns on the top. And the young males, as in most species, do a little practicing of their fighting maneuvers for when they grow up. We hope to see a gathering of giraffe, who are very social animals. And in the late afternoon, as the sun began to go down, he thought in a day you might see the giraffe moving gracefully along the plains. And as he got to twilight, we're really lucky to see another cheetah looking around for a chance to go after one last meal. And then, the sunset, which I've already mentioned, can be as dramatic as the sunrise, especially when the sun gets behind the acacia trees in sort of an iconic photograph, not an original composition, but inspiring nevertheless. And then if he was really lucky, there'd be a full moon when he was there, and he could see the elephants even by the light of the moon, because they keep moving during the night and eating and sleep very little. Well, it all happened. The dream came true. It was 65 years later, but the dream came true. And for a variety of reasons, Linda and I went to other parts of Africa first, but we've had 2 really nice trips to Kenya now as the source of these pictures. So what I'd like to do now is go through an eclectic selection of stories in random order here, so I hope you bear with me as I jump around in subjects. And let's start with our first story, which is called Born Free. Born Free was a remarkable movie that came out in 1966, and here are the couple of the movie posters for it. It's remarkable for a number of reasons. First, a young composer named John Barry wrote the score and got an Academy Award for the music. He later, 22 years later, wrote more music for Out of Africa and got another Academy Award. But for us, the interesting part was that it was a mainstream movie about the relationship between people and animals, which is not, your usual subject, instead of, the mob or love stories or politics, whatever. So it was a bold selection of a subject for the producers of the movie. It was faithful to a true story, not loosely based on a true story like you so often hear. It was almost exactly the true story. And of George Adamson, who was a game warden, a British employee. This is after World War II, but before Kenya became an independent country in 1963. So the British were still managing it. And he was the game warden for the area with his wife, Joy. And they adopted an orphan lion named Elsa. And she developed into quite the pet. So they had a great time, as shown in the movie, with Elsa, but then got to the point where her size made it impractical to be a pet anymore. And they were faced with a choice of sending her to the zoo somewhere, which they didn't want to do. So they decided to go through the arduous process of rewilding her, which had never been done successfully before to anybody's knowledge. And they were successful. And by the end of the movie, Elsa is both a wild lion, raising cubs and killing her own food and so forth, and yet still acting like a domestic lion. When the Adamsons came to visit, she would come over and nuzzle with them. And so it was really quite remarkable. And, I was inspired by the fact that it was in fact a true story. And wait a minute, we turn this thing around this way. And the movie was shot on site, not generally on site, exactly on site, on the exact spot where the Adamsons had been. And the logistics of that in 1966 are pretty remarkable. So overall, even before you watch the video of my presentation today, run home and get Born Free on demand if you don't remember the movie and watch it. It's worth it. And so here's Linda at Elsa's Lodge in Meru National Park, which is on the hill. And in the reception area of the lodge, there are a lot of black and white photos of the Adamsons and Elsa and all those events. Even George's old truck from the 1950s is still laying around down there. So you know you're really there. And because Linda and I got so involved in the story, we had heard that Elsa unfortunately caught a disease and died at the age of 4 after all this success. And George was so stricken by that, he built a memorial to her. So we wanted to see that. So we got our guide and the ranger to take us down a very long drive on a very poor excuse for a road down to the corner of Meru National Park, as you see here from the fence. And there's the memorial to Elsa. And so that was some closure for us on our affection with the story. The Elsa's hill, by the way, is populated by rock hyrax and interesting little creatures. Joy Adamson had one as a pet, who's in the movie, and they run around in great numbers. And if you don't zip your entryway to your room, you'll have a bunch of hyrax accompanying you on your vacation over there. Now, every guide's favorite trivia question is, there are a couple of species of hyrax, but beyond that, what's the closest relative in the animal kingdom to the hyrax? Elephant. Oh, you people are on top of it. Elephant, and the next one, if we want to really get technical, the next one is manatee right after that. But the elephant, the manatee, and the hyrax are all descended from a common ancestor. So kudos to those of you who knew that already. So that's our story on Born Free. Now, moving on to a new story, let's talk about what the Africans call the Great Migration, although there are a number of great migrations on the planet Earth, but this is the African Great Migration. So there were these herds. One estimate is that there are 1.5 million wildebeest, 400,000 zebra, 300,000 gazelle, 18,000 eland are very large antelopes like the size of an ox, and assorted other hoofed animals, and of course the predators that enjoy them. And they go on an annual trek from the Serengeti to the Maasai Mara and back. And so here on our map, we see the Serengeti. Where is that supposed to be? A little dot there. There's that little dot. So this is the Serengeti. It's in Tanzania. And this is the Maasai Mara up there. If you can see my little dot, there we are. Maasai Mara, that's in Kenya. This border is arbitrary and political. And fortunately, the two countries don't always agree on things, but they have agreed on not screwing up the border. So the border is open, and the animals don't know anything about the border or care about the political. They don't have passports or anything. So the way this annual thing starts is, we'll say in January and February, these giant herds are roughly down here, and they're not particularly organized. I mean, this orange blotch is just an example of the area they might be spread out over. It's not one big herd, but they're down here having calves, of which they're very good at, and but they smell the rain, and they're always in search of better grass, so they tend to start up this way. And they need to cross the Grumeti River, which is not too difficult. But then life gets a little challenging when they want to cross the Mara River to get up into the really prime grasslands up here. And so by, say, October, they're all up there. So just up and back, as the crow flies, would be maybe 1,200 miles, but It's estimated that most of the animals walk about 2,400 miles doing this. And it's this crossing of the Mara River that gets all the publicity. So here's our friendly wildebeest, and they congregate in these herds. And as far as anybody knows, these herds aren't organized in any logical way. This isn't like elephants that have a matriarch and a hierarchy or anything. They just somehow gather up. This sort of advanced herd here has gathered at a crossing point, and somehow one wildebeest wound up in the front down here, although he isn't necessarily senior or anything else, but somehow he wound up in the front. And he decided that today might be a good day to cross. But if we go back, you'll notice that there is a welcoming committee down here of a crocodile. So perhaps he noticed that. But I find it fascinating that although he has no particular authority, he turns around and says, "Not today," and all the other wildebeest say, "Oh, okay, not today." And they go back to wandering around aimlessly. Now, on a different occasion, at a different crossing, we saw that a lot of wildebeest had already come down close to the river. And so there's a theory here that no wildebeest actually decides to cross. They're just all driven to get closer and closer, and finally some dumb wildebeest who happens to be the closest gets pushed into the water, and he starts swimming, and everybody says, "Oh, it's on," and off they go. And so there they go. I mean, you've all seen pictures of the crocodiles killing some, but that is not the biggest danger to them at all. You'll notice that these crossings aren't exactly organized places, and a lot of them fall down and break their legs or get lost in the stampede and wind up drowning in the crossing. And the lucky ones pop up on the other side and just go back to milling around as if, nothing happened. But Linda and I went down to a sharp curve in the Mara River the day after that crossing I just showed you. And there was this enormous pile of wildebeest carcass down there, and I've eliminated the gruesome part of the picture. But the scavengers had gathered, because these are all the wildebeest that had drowned for one reason or another. And the estimates are that in that whole process of crossing over and crossing back again in the seasons, they probably lose 250,000 wildebeest. And the really stupid part of this, folks, is there's a bridge across the river, and they apparently make no attempt to use it. Now, it used to be a nice wide concrete bridge. This last time we were there, that bridge had been swept away by the floods. And so there was a narrow bridge, like a Corps of Engineers metal thing there for the cars to drive back and forth. But the animals apparently never make any attempt. Now, I've been in Yellowstone and watched the bison, and when they think about crossing a river, they look around, and if they see a bridge, they run on the bridge. I know, because I've been driving the other way when you see the bison herd coming. So I can only conclude that bison are a lot smarter than wildebeest, because the wildebeest just don't get it. So let's change to another story, only partially related. This is a stock image, not my photo. And we'll talk about the Maasai people a little bit. And here they're in their native dress. And they still maintain their ways of herding their cattle. They measure wealth in terms of the number of cattle that somebody has. And they've worked out these agreements on land use with all the various governments and stakeholders and so forth. About 80% of the Maasai people actually live in Tanzania. But of course, what we're talking about here is the 20% that live in Kenya, logically in the Maasai Mara in southwest Kenya. And the Maasai Mara, being very popular, is divided into all sorts of little pieces of land regulated in different ways and governed in different ways. But the Maasai seem to be doing fine with that. And one day when we were there, Linda and I wanted to go on a little nature walk in the afternoon, and we were assigned this guide. And he had an English name, I think it was Davidson. And so we went for a walk, and it was very educational. And we wound up at a hippo pool. And then he really surprised me by making a bunch of hippo noises. And all of the hippos got excited and ran in the water, and he thought that was really funny. And I didn't think guides were supposed to do stuff like that, but he had a pretty casual relationship with the animals. And I think that's really part of the story, because another stock image, I didn't have a good picture of a Maasai dance, but that evening at that lodge, there was a Maasai dance like this, demonstration, and one of the dancers looked familiar to me, and I went up to him afterwards and said, "Aren't you Davidson?" And he said, "No, I am Matumbo." Okay. And then he laughed and he said, "In the afternoon when I put on that uniform, I'm Davidson, but when I come back to my culture, I'm Matumbo." And I said, "Isn't that interesting?" I found it fascinating that he was so comfortable switching cultures. And he seemed to be perfectly happy when he was in one culture and perfectly happy in another culture. And so he made his transitions. And in a way, that's true of all the Maasai people. It seems they enjoy a lot of employment in the hospitality industry, particularly in security. You'll find at most of the camps, they have Maasai security guards, and they wander around in this sort of dress with their big spears that they're very good, very talented with, not guns. But basically the whole relationship between, the modern world and the Maasai seems to work pretty well, and it's, comforting. So let's talk about another story that's, I think, a happy story. And that is that Kenya seems to be doing very well in their anti-poaching efforts, and of course their anti-hunting efforts, which are pretty absolute these days. Poaching tended to focus on elephants with big tusks, both to be trophies, to be mounted on somebody's wall somewhere, but also for the value of the ivory, for carving. And then the rhinos, are valuable for their horns with the alleged and often disproven, medicinal qualities. But what I found in Kenya is an evidence of success in anti-poaching, in that there are elephants with big tusks and rhinos with big horns. And, we've been around southern Africa a great deal, and I have not seen this elsewhere in Africa. So this is a typical elephant, not a record breaker by any means, but, good sized tusks. You notice the tusks aren't symmetric. The elephants actually use these for digging up plants and for stripping bark off of trees. And they tend to use one side more than the other, just as you and I might be right-handed or left-handed. Elephants favor their right tusk or their left tusk. So they're often not symmetric because they wear down. And this guy had tusks that are almost touching in the front, and his right tusk has a big notch in it. And I'm sorry to tell you, I have absolutely no idea why, but I thought it was fascinating. So I don't know what's going to happen to that tusk. But the rhinos are very well protected. Particularly, this is in a rhino sanctuary in Meru National Park. And the rhino sanctuary is surrounded by a tall electric fence to keep the rhinos in and everything else out, except the tourists that come in through a gate. And as the rhinos go for their walk as a group, which is known as a crash of rhinos, by the way, as they go for their walks and they're grazing, they're accompanied by rangers. So they have their own, bodyguards, and they're very well taken care of. So you see some pretty remarkable horns. I did mention earlier about the black rhino and the V-shaped lip, and so this is the lip of the white rhino, again wide, which is actually how they got their name. The word wasn't white originally, it was the wide rhino, and people said it wrong and it became the white rhino. But you see that really healthy horn there, which I thought was magnificent. And then in this group of 3 that we saw one morning, I thought that guy in the center there was really doing well. So it's comforting to see these big tusks and big horns, not just because they're kind of fun to look at, but because they're evidence that the anti-poaching efforts are working so well. A class for lions story, which has nothing to do with the previous stories, but school, class, lesson, whatever we want to call it here. So one morning we saw this large herd gathered on the plains, and then as we watched, we realized how many lions there were there. Back. And, you know, the way you find lions in this grass is by looking for ears. The lions are the same colors as the grass. In fact, there were times, not on this occasion, but on other occasions, there were times when we were with drivers going through the grass in private concessions where you would only see a lion when you were like 5 feet away from it because they blend so well into the grass. But you got to look for ears. So we realized that there are really a lot of lions here. And then one of the adult females moved toward the herd, and the herd started running away, and everybody else seemed to be watching keenly. And then what happened after that we thought was very strange, where the one female lion left off to the right, and all the young ones followed her. And of course we drove around to get a different position, which also cleverly got us Mount Kilimanjaro in the background. Mount Kilimanjaro is actually in Tanzania, but it's best viewed from Kenya near the border. You'll notice there is still some snow on the top of Kilimanjaro, even in the dry season. So all of those who predicted that 10 years ago, you know, the snows of Kilimanjaro would be gone were wrong. But we're here to focus on the lions. So that many young ones must be multiple years of litters and the young of all 3 of the lionesses. But they kept walking toward us and they all followed her in tight formation, stopping occasionally to do a little nuzzling. But they walked and crossed the road. And then out of our sight, we were told later, unfortunately we missed the event, the other 2 female lions attacked a zebra and killed it and brought it over for everybody else to have lunch. And the young lions then got their chance to, you know, munch on zebra and learn how to do that. So to me, the most fascinating part of that is how the lions decide who's doing what today. Because I don't know, and I have watched a lot of nature shows, and I don't know anybody who really knows that one will just say, "Hey, I'll take the kids. You guys go kill a zebra." I don't know how they do that. So another story. Change gears again. The Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, a wonderful organization based in England, run by, logically enough, Mrs. Sheldrick, but they raise money for activities in Kenya, for anti-poaching patrols, for veterinary care for animals that are caught in traps by poachers, and most famously for an elephant orphanage. If they find an elephant in the wild, they bring it to their orphanage where they take good care of them until they can be reintroduced into the wild, and that is their goal. And so far, over the years, they've done 370 something elephants, I think is the number. And so their actual nursery for the younger orphans is in Nairobi, and at 11 a.m. every day, they bring in the public to view the orphans. And if you want to go, I highly recommend it, but you need to make a reservation and buy a ticket well in advance because it sells out every day. Very popular event. But they bring them down from the barns, and this is the youngest group, and they love their bottles, and they're very well bonded with their keepers, and they love to come down and socialize. Very important to elephants. And the keepers have trained the young ones to walk around the rope so tourists like Linda here can pet each of the elephants and help the elephants get used to the idea that humans aren't the bad guys. And some of them work on their dance moves while they're there for the crowd. And then they bring in the slightly older group of orphans that can be a little rougher in their play. But these are the ones that are maturing to the point where they can put them in a truck and take them down to Tsavo National Park, where they have reintroduction herds, and they have a whole process. And if you're really into this, one thing we didn't have an opportunity to do was Sheldrick actually operates a camp down in Tsavo where tourists can go and stay and actually watch the reintroduction process. But I've seen the video. It's available on their website, which is an excellent website. The video of reintroduction, and it's just heartwarming to see when the truck pulls up with an orphan that's being moved from the Nairobi down into the herd. All the other elephants come running out of the plains and gather around the truck to see who the new person is. And they all go do their touching with the trunk and so forth, getting to know each other. The website is, as I said, is excellent, and it's a great place to make donations. And your grandkids, like Gretchen's kids over here, her little daughters have adopted elephant orphans, and Sheldrick is terrific about sending paperwork and by email and pictures of this is your elephant and that sort of thing. So these elephants have a great old time playing in that mud, and the only caution I would give you if you have the opportunity to go is that red mud is something that the elephants enjoy throwing at the audience. Linda and I were thoroughly mudded, and the red is sufficiently staining so that you will need to go shopping for more clothes before you leave Nairobi. But other than that, it's a lot of fun. So another very short story, just two more short stories. This one I call Joy. I've always been somewhat jealous of puppies, human babies, who seem to be so happy to be alive because they're blissfully unaware of how complicated life will get later, right? And they're just enjoying the moment. So this little guy with his mother here, white rhino, we don't know how old he was exactly, but maybe a month or so. They are about 130 pounds when they're born, and they grow very quickly to be, large enough to be able to respond to a prey attack, because lions will take a baby hippo or a baby rhino if they could get one if the mother wasn't paying attention. But this mother was quite tolerant of us, and so we were able to get close as the little guy went running around, jumping and hopping. And you don't see rhinos jumping in the air very often. It's not a common sight. But this guy was leaping up and rushing around and just having the best old time and just enjoying being alive on a beautiful day, in Kenya, and being perfectly safe. And it was remarkable for us because the mother was so tolerant that we could get close to him. as he was running around. And in my last story, I just called goodbye on the last day of our last trip to Africa. Linda and I were sitting in the reception area of the lodge waiting for the ride to take us out to the airstrip to begin the arduous journey home. And this warthog walked in to the reception area, and I just like to think he was an ambassador that came to say goodbye. And so that's my story.
Do we have any questions?
So if we have questions, if you want to grab a mic for your questions, somebody running around with a mic. Donna's got a mic.
What kind of photographic equipment do you use?
I use a pair of Nikon 850s. The new Nikon Z system is undoubtedly fabulous, but I'm kind of too old to start over with the mirrorless, so I'm happy with my 850s. Many of these pictures are taken with a 500 millimeter lens. And the 850s have very high resolution sensor. That picture of the baby hippo, baby rhino up in the air, we have in our house in a 20 by 30 print, and it would easily be a 40 by 60 print, no problem. So it gives me good high resolution images. A lot of my friends who do this sort of thing these days have Sony and Fuji and Canon, and so there are a lot of brands that are all good, but personally I use Nikons.
Any other questions?
Mine isn't exactly a question. My husband and I have gone to Africa several times, and we have wonderful pictures, but that is the best storytelling I've heard on a trip to Africa. It was really
Thank
wonderful.
you so much.
Okay.
Oh, well, thank you. You can come to any of my presentations. You'll always be welcome.
A lot of your shots are really beautifully composed, and I wonder, have you cropped them? Have you cropped them to get the good?
Most of them are. Some of them I, got lucky. But the animals tend to move quickly. And, in doing landscapes, you can move around, take your time, say, I want to get this tree just about there, or I want to make sure I don't get the trash can in the picture, But when you're doing wildlife, all of a sudden the lion comes out of the grass and you just shoot pictures, and then you go home later and say, now, if I trim this a little this way and this a little this way, I'll be better off. But, if you can not crop too much, you preserve a lot of the resolution and you do much better at enlargements. If you do a lot of cropping, you've lost a lot of the resolution. You don't have as many pixels left. But yeah, these days, I'm very much concerned about artificial intelligence and people creating pictures. And Linda shows me these pictures on Facebook every morning from, hippos with 3 baby hippos riding on her back and so forth. And I said, yeah, that didn't happen. People are making up that stuff on the computer. And I much prefer and advocate pictures that capture what's really happening, the real world. But I have to admit that there's a certain amount of post-processing in cropping and maybe changing the exposure just a little bit, that sort of thing that, that makes sense for wildlife pictures because you often have to do it in a hurry.
Any other questions?
Do you think that the other countries in Africa are doing a good job of protecting their wildlife? Kenya seems to have this nice national park.
Well, I think that, it's improved a great deal all over the continent, I think. Although You know, there's a very difficult question about the sort of morality of the private farms that you see in South Africa in particular. I mean, the alternative to poaching is that sometimes the government says we've really got too many rhinos over here, and they actually sell them, and people buy the rhinos and then have them on their farm, and then they get somebody from Texas with a big gun who flies over and he shoots one of these captive rhinos and says, look at me, you know, I got a rhino. And it's really not taking a rhino out of the wild, I have to admit that. So it's not really poaching, it just seems like a shame to me. But I think all the countries are doing a much better job than they used to. But it's still true that in Southern Africa, in many areas, they've just lost the gene pool for rhinos with big horns and elephants with big tusks. So all that's left is elephants with little tusks passing along their genes, and it's very much a genetic thing. I mean, then you get baby elephants with little tusks. They grow up with little tusks. So I think, you know, it's really important that Kenya, you know, hang on to the strength of their program in that regard. But I think everybody's doing better across the continent.
Next question.
I was just curious, do you put together your own travel, or do you have a travel agent, or do you use a specific adventure package?
A little, yeah, the answer is yes. A little of all of the above. Sometimes the second trip to Kenya was part of a group of photographers. There's a company, a wonderful company called Visionary Wild, that organizes trips for serious photographers, and the second trip to Kenya was with them. So they take small groups. So the trip is pre-planned. You just show up and go along, go with the flow. But on that trip, for example, we wanted to go to Elsa's, and so there's a travel agency in Philadelphia called Premier Tours that I trust, and we had them make the arrangements for this sort of pre-trip for that section of it, and then we went back to Nairobi and joined the Visionary Wild people. So it's a little of all of the above. You know, Linda and I have been there often enough, and the internet is capable enough now that, you know, you can just make a reservation to lodge like you do at the, you know, the Marriott at the airport. I mean, it's not hard anymore. It used to be a big mystery. The hard part is finding good drivers and people, you know, meet and greet services, somebody to meet you at the airport and help you through the passport control and the baggage claim and everything, all of which is still, let's say, an evolving science in most of Africa. So a little of all of the above. But if anybody wants to talk, you know, travel to Africa, I'm always available to talk about it. We won't keep the whole group for that, but I'm always around.
Any more questions?
You've shared your travel and photographic experiences with us, and climates ranging all the way from very cold ones with penguins to equatorial ones like this. What's next on your agenda?
The agenda is shrinking, as Warren Buffett said. I'm beginning to feel old. Yes. So the agenda is shrinking. At the risk of being too dramatic about it, I really think we're making the hard decision to say I'm done with Africa and India. It's really hard work getting there, maybe even Australia. You've seen the airfares for business class, and I'm too old and fat to sit and coach. And so it's getting really, really expensive. So the only thing on the agenda right now is with the cameras is in November we'll be up in Haines, Alaska. Haines, for some strange reason, is the last place in Alaska where the rivers freeze as winter comes on. And all the eagles in Alaska know that. So they all go to Haines in November. And so I've seen wonderful pictures from other photographers of groups of eagles. So we'll go up in November and try that in Haines with another small group of photographers. And then in February, we're going down to Costa Rica. You know, Costa Rica is kind of exotic, but it's not far. You go to Costa Rica on Southwest, for crying out loud. You don't even have to go on a real airline, you know. You fly to Houston, change planes, you can be there in a couple hours. Well, you know, if you go on American through Dallas, I don't know, 3.5 hours or something to Dallas and another 3.5 to Costa Rica. So we'll go down to Costa Rica. So I'm looking for more opportunities in this hemisphere, as much as I love India and Africa.
Okay, Tony has a question, I see.
Yeah, how long does it take you to get from here to Kenya?
Well, a long time. First of all, I need to preface this by saying I leave margins most of the time. I'm really tired of being left in airports and missing the first day of the safari or something like that. So, you know, and Linda's learned to tolerate me when we'll fly to Dallas and she says, okay, how long before our next plane? Is it 5.5 hours? And she's, oh my God, but she understands why I do that, But I give you one example from South Africa when we were at Pinda near Durban, and we came back to Johannesburg, and then, Qatar is a pretty good airline, but you got to go to Doha for everything. So we drove from Pinda all the way to Johannesburg, and then flew to Doha, and then from Doha to, where did we go that time? Dallas, I guess, huh? Doha to Dallas. And then Dallas, we had to wait for the American flight back up. Anyway, it was 37 hours. So the answer to your question is about typically 30, 35 something hours, of continuous travel, unless you want to break it up, but that makes the whole trip longer. And we're paying this dog sitter a lot of money, and
Any other questions?
Mara?
The mic is on its way.
The mic is on its way.
This is just a comment. I have my Africa shirt on. We went 10 years ago to Botswana, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. It's the most unique experience we've ever had, and we've been all around the world.
Yeah.
And it took us 34 hours. That's with time zone changes and layovers, etc., to come home. It was worth it. If you've never been anywhere, go to Africa. If you've been everywhere, go to Africa. It's absolutely the most unique experience you'll have, being with the animals where they live, and you're intruding, but they let you watch them.
And thank you, Mark. And I absolutely agree with you, of course. And I would say that over the years, we've been doing this a long time, Linda and I, and over the years, the animals, even now in India, have become more and more habituated to the tourists. I just made an allusion to, coming within 5 feet of a lion in the grass in Kenya in this last trip. They just figure that the people in the vehicles, as long as you stay in the vehicle and sit down, they're okay. And even in India, the tigers, you may remember my last talk where we talked about the tigers, are getting habituated. So it really is now amazing. It used to be elusive, animals, and you would say, oh, that was great. I saw a little bit of a glimpse of a leopard or something. Now you drive right up, say, hi, leopard, and it's really a wonderful experience. Art Wolf, who is a famous nature photographer and TV personality, once said to me that he thought if you're interested in wildlife, there are only 4 places on the planet that you absolutely had to go. A lot of other places you should go, but only 4 you absolutely had to go to. And that's South Georgia Island, the Galapagos, Katmai National Park, and the Maasai Mara in Kenya. So all of you can make a little checklist there, and these days you can go to places like South Georgia on luxury cruise ships. So you might consider all of that. But yeah, going to Africa is something everybody ought to do once. And you go to Kenya and go to the Maasai Mara, that's amazing. You go to Botswana, to the Okavango Delta is amazing. The Sabi Sand area of South Africa, just to the west of Kruger National Park, is amazing. Although the lodges there have gotten a little carried away. The same thing can be said in Botswana. There's, it's become very popular with a really high-end crowd. And Linda and I went to Singita Boulder's Lodge many years ago, and we thought $1,000 a night was outrageous, but we scraped up the money and go, and now it's $4,500 a night. All inclusive, of course, but still $4,500 a night. It adds up, and you got to pay the dog sitter. So,
Next question.
yeah.
My question is, you mentioned something about India. Do you have a show and a story about India? Because we've been there, and I would love to hear your story if you have one.
Oh, well, the video is probably still available. I talked about tigers. My focus in going to India, India is such an incredibly fascinating place, but I haven't explored all the cultures and gone to any of the festivals or gone swimming in the Ganges or anything. But just visiting the national parks to see the wildlife and the tigers. So I talked about that in a previous presentation, and Ary may still have the video somewhere. Yeah, he says he does. Still in the files. So I would recommend that to you. And I would say that's, the relationship between the tigers and the surrounding people, by surrounding, I mean people who live near the national parks, in India is much more troubled and has a long way to evolve compared to Africa, where it's, much more organized and successful these days, as I said with the Maasai.
Last question.
Very briefly, your 3 most important travel tips.
My 3 most important travel trips. You want travel tips? Yeah, leave margins at airports when changing planes. Tip number 1, because you can get left behind. Keep checking your schedules over and over and over, and your messages, and double check everything twice and verify everything twice, and leave yourself, if you can, a little bit of time to relax. We've found in our old age now that we put in these action-packed schedules. Linda and I also travel to visit wineries around the world, and that can get fatiguing too. It's a lot of fun, but after a while you can get funned out and get pretty well exhausted. And so I would say, if you can, it seems difficult to say, I came all the way over to a foreign country, I'm going to take a day off, but it's often worth it and helps you enjoy the rest of the trip if you can do that. Okay.
Thank you so much, Art.